And now, God, open my mouth so that I can speak. Open our ears so that we can hear, and open our hearts so that we can change by your power and through your grace. Amen. Please be seated. Then they came to Capernaum, and he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. I'm going to refrain from sharing the story of how long it took me to figure out what it meant when someone is referred to as the goat. I'll let you figure that one out for yourself if you need to. Instead, I'm going to ask you to take a moment to define what makes something great. Literally, someone. What makes something great? What makes something great? I'm asking you to speak. Okay, the best. What else? Kindness. What else? Talent. Okay. I bet if I were to ask each of you to do it, there would be almost as many definitions as there are people here today. A casual glance at our current political landscape and the searing divisions across party lines will tell you that there are some very differing opinions on what makes a great candidate for elected office. What makes a great priest or a great parent or teacher? Who can say definitively? I'm not sure. What I am sure of is that Jesus seems to have a perspective on greatness, and I think we all might do well to pay attention. Today we continue our journey through the Gospel of Mark, and for many of us who were here last week, it sounds really familiar. Last week, Jesus turned Peter's world upside down by telling him that he was going to suffer and be killed, which really doesn't sound too great to anyone, least of all Peter. And now here he is again with the same story, and the disciples just can't wrap their brains around it. It's literally like he's speaking another language. Have you ever had one of those moments where someone explained something to you and you were actually paying attention, but it flew right over your head because it didn't align with anything that you thought you knew about whatever the topic was? So you just stood there and kind of nodded your head and said, uh-huh, and then quickly said something like, oh my gosh, how did it get so late? And got out so you didn't have to have the conversation anymore. That's kind of how I imagine the disciples in this scene we get today. They're listening, but they don't get what Jesus is saying, so they literally just move on. They don't even try to examine this ridiculous thing Jesus just said because they don't want to be embarrassed. So now they've arrived at their next stop after what sounds like a pretty animated discussion amongst themselves, and Jesus asks them what all the hubbub was about. Which is kind of funny because I get the sense that Jesus knew all along and he was sort of playing a game with them. I love when he does this kind of thing. In response to Jesus' question about their conversation, a conversation which for them was probably designed to get their minds back in the whole "the Messiah is the winner" game and stop Jesus from spouting out any more nonsense, they say absolutely nothing. Again. Jesus has tried a few times to reframe their sense of what greatness is, and now here they are arguing about which one of them is the greatest. And I'm going to guess it was probably along the lines of who was closest to Jesus or who had brought the most followers to him or something like that. I would probably be shaking my head at this point, but being the teacher that he is, Jesus doesn't let this moment get lost in his own frustration. He sits down and calls them together and offers them a new lesson on greatness. And here again, he's flipping the script on them. He knows that they still have fantasies of triumph. So he tells them that if they really want to be first, then the way to do that is to actually stop trying to serve themselves first and put the needs of others ahead of their own. To make that point, He brings a child into the group, and embracing that child, he explains that anyone who receives a child like the one he is holding receives him, and in turn, the God who sent him. Now, most of you know I love children. I know that there are a lot of people in the room who really love children, so this scene touches us. But if we get caught up in the sentimentality of this story, we rob it of its power and of its relevance to our lives right now. Gathering up a child like this in the context of life in the first century makes this an extremely bold statement. Children in this time really had no place in society. No rights, no power, no one to advocate for them. They were totally vulnerable. I don't mean that they weren't valued by their families, but there was nothing built into the structure of society to protect them like we expect in contemporary society. When Jesus says, in order to be first, you must be last, and whoever welcomes a child in his name welcomes him, while holding a child, it would be hard to miss that he's asking them to look past their own desires and dedicate their lives in service to the needs of others, especially those who are vulnerable and helpless. He's telling them to do for those who cannot or do not have the power to do for themselves. He's telling us to outdo each other in our efforts to serve, not so that we can win praise, but so that everyone gets taken care of, and that this is the pathway to God. This is the definition of greatness for Jesus. Living lives of service, lifting up those who need to be lifted, and giving of ourselves unconditionally. Later this morning at the ministry fair that will take place in Sperling Hall, we'll be highlighting many of the ministry efforts that makes St. Stephen's such a dynamic place to be in community. I urge all of you, before you dash out at the conclusion of the service, to take a few moments to learn more about all that is being done in and through this place to serve the members of this community and also the world around us. And then ask yourself, what am I being called to? If you're unsure of the answer, let's get together and engage in a period of discernment, because I promise you, God is calling each of us into something. Remember that what we do here on Sunday mornings, this is worship. And being a Christian is not simply about coming here on Sundays. Now, don't get me wrong, I want you to come here on Sundays. But being a Christian involves being an active and engaged part of a community. And church happens every day in and through a community of loving people dedicated to the service of others in honor of God and with gratitude for the love of God, who wants nothing more from us and nothing less from us than to live lives of wholeness steeped in love. And these ministries we do here, they don't just happen by themselves. They need the involvement of the members of this community to actively participate in order for them to grow into sustainable, thriving endeavors. Every ministry, every effort contributes to what makes this community whole. And there's something for everybody, no matter your skill set, your age, or your ability. The only requirement is a heart to engage, and I know each of you has one. As you explore all of the opportunities there are to serve in and through our community, I would like to offer you all something else to reflect on. It's clear that with his teachings, especially from last week and today, Jesus is calling us into service, specifically for others. Consider the possibility of putting your energy into something that does not personally benefit you. Very often, particularly in church communities, people contribute to the internal ministries that they personally need or benefit from. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. However, if that's all we do, then we end up doing things only to really serve ourselves, which is not exactly the kind of service Jesus is calling us into. We're being asked to evaluate the needs of others and respond with action. You may not be a person who has any intention of taking advantage of online worship, but that shouldn't stop you from serving at the tech table and making worship available to those who cannot join us in person. You may not have young or youth group age children at this particular time, but that shouldn't stop you from engaging and helping to create vibrant children, youth, and family programs here at St. Stephen's. If we only invest our time and energy in the things that specifically benefit us, are we really putting the needs of others ahead of our own? I offer this to you for consideration, knowing that each of us has only so much bandwidth, and that sometimes we have to be the ones to create what we need if it's not already there. There is no perfect binary response to all of this. Do this or do that. There is not only one way to respond to what you see in front of you. Yet I believe it's a worthy reflection point, and I look forward with a hopeful heart to seeing what fruit your reflection will bear. In the meantime, today is a great day to celebrate and lean into the work God has given us to do, to ensure that St. Stephen's itself does not exist as an insular community that gets caught up in serving itself to satisfy our own desires for greatness, to make sure our efforts are genuine and motivated by service to those in need around us through love and compassion. As James implored us in his letter, let us show by the good life of our community that our works are done with gentleness, born of wisdom, remembering that a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. It is a great day to channel the unconditional love of God for all people, no matter who they are, into all of our efforts to serve, so that we can all really be one human family connected to each other and to God through love. Now, doesn't that sound like the definition of great?